So we talk about change, but the problem today is that we're all stuck. We're stuck because things are changing so quickly, we don't know what to do. We're stuck. We're stuck because we've forgotten how to speak into other people's listening, and we've forgotten to listen when other people speak. Organizations, communities, individuals, institutions, we're all stuck because the solutions of the past don't work anymore, and the solutions of the future haven't been constructed yet. So what I hope to do today is to share with you a solution for the future that you construct yourself. It's called adaptive action, and it includes 3 simple questions, and it's good for getting yourself unstuck, whatever kind of complex problem you're stuck in, wherever you're stuck. Now, adaptive action isn't new. Heroes across the ages have used adaptive action. They have been stuck in very difficult circumstances. So think about your favorite hero. Is it Mother Teresa? Is it Lady Di? Who's your favorite hero? And think about the fact that at some point they were stuck in a way that they couldn't get out of, but they thought about it in new ways. They took action and changed the world that they lived in. And you can do the same thing with these 3 simple questions. Now, the reason I know about this is that I talked with some people from Mahtomedi, some leaders from your community. And they said wonderful things, and you heard some of them this morning, about how beautiful it is and how strong the community is and how much individual groups give to the community. But they also talked about some ways that you were stuck. They said that you had a failed school levy last year. Some of them said that your kids struggle with alcohol and drug abuse. They talked about a lake that was in trouble. They talked about infrastructure, social and physical infrastructure, that's aging and getting fragile. And they also said that even though there are deep investments in special groups around the community, there's no connective tissue that gives a community as a whole. Now, these may not be problems that keep you awake at night, but they are problems that have your community stuck. And if you want to move into a productive and healthy future, you're going to get yourself unstuck, and I'll help you see how. Now, I have some personal experience with stuck issues. This is my husband, John. So we had some sticky issues. Whenever you marry someone who's 23 years older or 23 years old younger than yourself, you're going to have some sticky issues. So at a particular time, my work with complex systems was expanding, and John's health and energy were contracting at the same time. We were stuck. I wanted to work 18 hours a day and travel around the world and do research and share our findings, and he wanted to stay at home and read good books and listen to music and watch professional sports on TV. Now, neither of those was bad. They were both good. They were perfectly fit to our times in life. The problem was they didn't fit together so well, and we were stuck. So what we did was to use adaptive action. We saw patterns in our complex situation. We looked for patterns and we found them. We understood those patterns in creative ways, and then we took action to move ourselves forward over and over again in a rich life of wonderful discovery together. Now, the way we do that in adaptive action to make it actionable and simple is that we turn these 3 steps into questions. So the question that helps you see is the question, what? What do you know? What do you see? What's happening? What's working? What's not working? What's surprising? So we had a great what. I had gotten really irritated with John because I kept having to speak loudly to him and repeat stuff, and I thought he wasn't paying attention, and that made me really irritated. But one night we were watching the movie Children of a Lesser God. Oh, he has hearing loss, right? So that what led us on a whole different journey of discovery and exploration and action. It got us unstuck. That's what. The second question, the one that's about meaning making, is so what? So what does it mean? So what do I want? So what's important here? So what isn't important? So what can change and what should stay the same? So what? Well, John was a great so-whatter. He was a wonderful so-whatter. He had retired, but he was an avid volunteer. So at first, he read for the blind. And then when his eyes began to fail a little bit, he drove for the county. He thought that was a good thing. So he drove people, elders and people with disabilities, to their appointments and to help them get around. And at some point, he couldn't do that either. So what? So what does a retired Chinese psychologist who had worked in prisons for 15 years, so what does he do? He volunteered to help immigrant kids in trouble. So what? So John was able, whenever and wherever he got stuck, to see a way through that path and to find something new. Now, the third question is, you might guess it, now what? And it's probably the most important one because it has to do with action. Because it doesn't matter what you see, it doesn't matter what you know. If you don't do something, you're going to stay stuck. Now what? So there was a point when I was really worried about John. I wanted to travel, but I was worried about him being at home, and I was worried, and I'd travel, and I was worried, and I was stuck. But what I decided to do was to shorten my trips and call John every day when I was gone. So less travel and more communication was less worry, and I was unstuck. Now what? What? So what? Now what? Now, in each case, the now what is never the end. There is always a next what in a complex system that you can't predict or control. But as long as John and I thought about our issue as our life stages, we were stuck. He was not going to get younger, and I was not going to quit working. We were absolutely stuck. It wasn't until we stepped out of that certainty and into a possibility that we couldn't imagine that we began to move forward. It wasn't until we stepped into adaptive action and really looked carefully at what before we could move forward. Now, I don't want to make it sound easier than it is. You take adaptive action in a world that's uncertain and chaotic. We never knew what was going to happen when we took action. We also never knew what the next sticky issue was going to be. All we knew was that we were ready for it when it came. Now, what we find is that the reason it's difficult to do adaptive action is when you say what, it's hard to see with fresh eyes. When you do so what, it's hard to think in new and creative ways. Excuse me. We often think, excuse me, our own ever and always voice. When we do so what, we think of our ever and always voice. We understand things in the same old way. And when it comes to now what, we're afraid. We're afraid to take a step and do something. And so often, even in the midst of adaptive action, we end up getting stuck. But if you begin to say, step by step, in this moment, in this place, what, so what, now what. So my hope for you is that today you'll take a step to begin your own adaptive action, to look at whatever chaos is holding you back, and to zoom in on something that you can, what, so what, now what, about. Now, adaptive action isn't just about difficult, stuck issues. It also works when you're in love. What is happening? So what do I want to have happen? What do I want to see? Now what am I going to do? And then you take action. And then when you do, the pattern that includes you and your partner and your relationship all shift. And the world is different. And you start your next adaptive action together. Now, adaptive action works for individuals, but it also works for organizations. It works for organizations, too. At the Systems Dynamics Institute, we work with all kinds of organizations at all levels and communities. So we do some work with healthcare organizations. Are they stuck? Yeah, right? So one particular client was trying to deliver services to elders and people with disabilities in their homes so they could stay in community longer. But they couldn't figure out what products and services were going to work. Stuck. So their what was to videotape stories from patients and families and professionals. Their so what was to look at those videotapes and look for similarities and differences. They found, for example, everybody was concerned about security. That was same. But they found out they defined safety differently. The professionals thought safety was protocols and security and comfort and constraint. What do you think the patients thought? They thought security was freedom. The now what that came out of that was that this organization looked for products and services that both gave support and safety and gave freedom within it. They got unstuck. You can also imagine that the education systems are a great adaptive action challenge. When we work with school systems, we teach everybody in the system how to do adaptive action. What, so what, now what? And the transformation is amazing. School board members talk to each other differently, and they talk to staff differently. Unions and management have breakthrough negotiations. Teachers learn and learners teach. There's one teacher in San Francisco, third grade. He taught his students adaptive action, and now they teach each other mathematics. What? So what? Now what? In institutions of all kinds. So that's the secret to getting unstuck. Adaptive action at all levels, at all scales, at all times, short, long, and in between. That's how your heroes got to be heroes. There's a terrible situation I'm engaged in. What? I've got to think of it in a new way and find a new path to solve this issue. So what? I'm going to do something and see what happens, even if I don't know what the consequences are. Now what? And they kept doing that over and over and over in lifetimes of transformation for themselves and their communities. What, so what, now what? And you can do the same thing, those three questions. So I'm going to ask you, Mahtomedi, what are you going to do to get unstuck? What can you do? You think about the school, where the funding of your schools in the future is a major challenge for you that you're going to be talking about all year. So what is the importance of a school in your community? So what are you doing and thinking about for the future? What are the benefits of quality education that will come to you? Now, what will make the most of this opportunity? How can you use this opportunity of conversation about the levy to build community coherence and conversation? How can you do that? Your kids are having trouble, I understand, I am told, with drugs and alcohol. What's the depth and breadth of that problem? So what resources are available to prevent abuse or to help kids when they're in trouble? Now what will you do to help your community be safe and clean and healthy? The lake that brought many of you here, the beautiful lake, is in trouble. What do you know for sure about your lake, and what do you wonder? What are three scenarios of what might happen to the lake? Now, what are you willing to do to get ready for those scenarios and be ready for the future when it comes? Your infrastructure, social and physical infrastructure, are at risk. What are the weakest links, socially and physically? So what risks are there? Now, what are you going to do to go to those weakest points and strengthen them for the good of the community? You have lots of groups that are doing really powerful, important work, but they are disconnected. What resources are invested in special interests right now? So what can you do to look for gaps and overlaps? Now, what will you do, Mahtomedi, to build a network that supports the whole and all its parts? And so I ask you today, what are you going to do Now what is your next adaptive action? Thank you.